You're 15 years old. Today, that probably means school, a bedroom in your parents' house, and someone asking where you're going before you walk out the door. In a medieval town, somebody your age might sleep beneath another family's roof, work from morning onward, handle money or valuable tools, answer to a master, and take the blame when something expensive went wrong. That sounds remarkably grown up. The same young person could also sneak out, drink too much, start a fight, chase romance, ignore orders, or disappear for 3 days, because responsibility does not magically install good judgment. That is what makes medieval teenagers so interesting. Serious duties could arrive early. Serious supervision stayed right beside them. Apprenticeship shows the pattern clearly. Surviving contracts from late medieval towns record children and adolescents being placed with masters to learn trades, often beginning in their early teens. 14th and 15th century agreements from Montpellier, for example, include young people entering other households as servants or apprentices. Masters usually supplied lodging, food, clothing, and instruction. The young worker supplied labor and obedience. A modern 14-year-old might be complaining about a group assignment. A medieval 14-year-old could be entering a job, school, housing arrangement, and replacement household in one move. That household mattered. Moving out did not automatically produce freedom. The master's home became the new center of authority. You worked there, usually ate there, often slept there, and learned there. Instructions about where to be, when to work, and how to behave carried real weight. Apprenticeship taught a craft alongside discipline. London records make the arrangement especially visible. Advancement could depend on completing a term of service, while apprentices who ran away might trigger legal disputes. Rules differed between towns and centuries, yet the assumption remained familiar. A young person could be trusted with valuable labor, while adults still believed somebody older needed to control the worker. If this kind of everyday medieval life is your thing, subscribe. The strangest parts usually begin when the rules finally meet actual people. Actual people had a habit of refusing to cooperate. Medieval legal records preserve runaway servants and apprentices, broken service agreements, and young workers who abandoned arrangements planned for them by adults. Completion rates for apprenticeship in late medieval London could be surprisingly low, with some apprentices leaving before the end of their training. These records quickly destroy the image of every 13 or 14-year-old becoming a tiny, obedient adult the moment work began. Plenty stayed, learned their trade, and built careers. Others fought with masters, spotted better opportunities, or simply walked away. Your family may have placed you with that master because the arrangement offered a future. The master had already spent money feeding, housing, clothing, and teaching you. Then one morning, you decide you have had enough. To the adults, you have broken an agreement and caused an economic loss. To you, leaving may feel like getting out of a miserable situation. One departure could carry 2 completely different meanings, depending on which side of the door you stood. Boys were hardly the only adolescents leaving their parents' homes. Young women entered service too, especially domestic service, and many moved into another household while still young. Contracts from Montpellier record girls and young women working for urban employers, including migrants from surrounding countryside. In parts of late medieval Europe, service could form a stage between childhood and marriage. Young people learned household skills, built connections, received compensation, and sometimes accumulated resources for their future. Female servants might earn wages or clothing. Some agreements even linked compensation with a future dowry. Those responsibilities were real, and so was the authority surrounding them. An employer could function as boss, household head, and guardian at the same time. A servant's behavior affected her work and her reputation, with consequences for later opportunities. The arrangement can look strange from a modern angle. A girl might leave her parents, move into another home, work full days, and contribute economically while adults still watched where she went, whom she spoke with, and whether her behavior met local expectations of respectability. Class changed the setting without removing the tension. A young noble could train for war, serve inside another elite household, learn courtly behavior, manage horses, accompany older men, or prepare for responsibilities connected with land and dynasty. A squire might be young, armed, mobile, and surrounded by adults involved in serious military or political business. That does not mean 14-year-old medieval boys were generally charging into battle. Most young people spent their time doing much less cinematic work, carrying grain, serving meals, cleaning, watching livestock, learning crafts, and helping in shops. Young people could enter adult institutions long before they gained adult authority inside them. You might stand close to power while possessing very little yourself. You could carry a weapon and still obey an older lord. You could learn how an estate or household functioned while owning no household of your own. Then we reach an institution almost perfectly designed to discover how much trouble young people can create after being separated from their families: the medieval university. Oxford gives us a spectacular example. Many late medieval students were young men, including some within the age range we would now call teenage. They arrived from different regions, lived away from family, formed their own social groups, drank in taverns, and belonged to a university community with special privileges. Picture student life with fewer dorm regulations, confusing legal jurisdictions, and far too many people carrying weapons. Medieval Oxford coroners' records preserve the ugliest results. Students appear in tavern quarrels, fights between regional groups, street violence, and fatal assaults. One late 13th century conflict began inside a tavern and spilled into the street, involving swords and axes. These cases cannot tell us what an ordinary student evening looked like. Quiet nights spent reading rarely produce homicide investigations. The pattern still tells us something. Young men living beyond family supervision, surrounded by peers, alcohol, competition over status, and weapons, sometimes behaved in ways every authority around them considered unacceptable. Oxford scholars also organized themselves into regional nations, identities capable of producing strong loyalty and equally strong conflict. Northerners fought Southerners, students fought townspeople, university officials tried to control the students. Civic officials tried too. Authorities were plentiful. Fortunately for the troublemakers, so were the taverns. Here the title begins to make sense. Medieval teenagers often look wild in surviving records because those records catch them at the exact moment youthful behavior crashes into adult spaces: workshops, taverns, streets, universities, and courts. They were already moving through the working, drinking, trading, and occasionally violent world of adults, rather than spending adolescence inside a protected social bubble. That brings us to the harder question. If medieval communities expected young people to carry so much responsibility, did they actually consider them adults? The answer depended on far more than a birthday. Medieval people had no single social category matching our modern teenager, with one clean line dividing childhood from adulthood. Age mattered alongside marriage, occupation, household position, property, gender, local law, and dependence on other people. A 15-year-old heiress, apprentice, servant, and university student could all be 15 while occupying completely different positions in society. Return to the apprentice. He may have left his parents' home and spent every day working. His hands might touch dangerous tools, expensive materials, and customers' property. He could still remain subordinate inside the household. His labor had genuine economic value. The master held the higher position. Modern life encourages us to connect employment with independence. Get a job, earn your own money, perhaps move into your own place, and each step supposedly gives you greater control. Medieval service could lead somewhere else. Leaving your parents might place you immediately beneath another household authority. The roof changed. Hierarchy remained. Masters were generally expected to train and maintain apprentices, and, in many settings, supervise their behavior. Apprentices owed obedience in return. When that relationship collapsed, civic authorities or courts might become involved. A runaway apprentice created more than an angry household argument. The master could claim lost labor, wasted training, and a broken agreement. University students appear freer at first glance. Even they belong to institutions with their own systems of authority. Medieval universities developed corporate privileges and disciplinary structures. Depending on the issue, scholars might fall under university or ecclesiastical jurisdiction rather than ordinary civic courts. Those privileges protected students while simultaneously placing them beneath chancellors, masters, halls, colleges, and university statutes. A student could therefore travel hundreds of miles from his parents and enjoy unusual legal privileges while facing rules governing clothing, lodging, conduct, study, and behavior in public. He belonged to a corporation that defended its members and expected those members to obey. That helps explain the intensity of town and gown conflict. University populations were young, mobile, socially distinct, and privileged in ways local residents sometimes resented. Students could view town officials as people interfering with rights granted to scholars. Add drinking, insults, regional rivalry, and a world where staffs, knives, and swords could enter an argument, and a ridiculous disagreement could become lethal very quickly. If you like history that gets messier the closer you look, subscribe. Medieval adulthood is about to become much less convenient than a birthday. Responsibility and impulsiveness could exist in the same person. Institutional privilege came with supervision. Leaving the family home frequently transferred authority rather than removing it. For young women, household position and reputation could shape the boundary even more tightly. A servant might earn compensation and perform work the household genuinely depended on while remaining subordinate to her employers. Her future might be influenced by what neighbors, family members, employers, and possible spouses thought of her behavior. Mobility opened opportunities and exposed her to new scrutiny at the same time. A young man's tavern fight might enter the record as violence, disorder, or a dispute over honor. A young woman's sexual or romantic reputation could follow her into future employment or marriage prospects. Girls still exercised agency, and female servants did not all live under identical surveillance. Circumstances varied enormously. Living away from one's parents simply tells us too little by itself about how much freedom a young woman actually had. Money did not settle the issue either. Some young workers received wages. Others were compensated through lodging, food, clothing, training, or a mixture of them. Female servants could sometimes accumulate resources connected with marriage. Producing economic value through your labor still left plenty of major decisions in somebody else's hands. A teenager today can earn money at a part-time job and complain that their parents continue treating them like a child. A medieval worker might recognize the emotional contradiction with considerably higher stakes. You are responsible enough to work. You get blamed when things go wrong. You can carry heavy loads and learn skilled tasks. Valuable objects pass through your hands every day. Then the person feeding, housing, and training you can still decide when you may leave, what behavior crosses the line, and whether you are fulfilling your obligations. Moving responsibility a few years earlier does not explain the system. Medieval youth operated through a different arrangement of dependence and authority. Once that becomes clear, much of the supposedly wild behavior becomes easier to understand. Young people entered new environments filled with peers and unfamiliar opportunities before acquiring complete independence. An urban apprentice met other apprentices and workers. Servants could live beside unrelated young people inside large households. A new Oxford student might suddenly be surrounded by hundreds of other young men who had also recently left home. Peer pressure managed perfectly well without a phone. Young people formed friendships, rivalries, regional identities, romances, and social groups. They played games and drank when drink was available. Some broke rules, fought, abandoned work, or challenged authority. Most also spent enormous amounts of time performing repetitive and deeply uninteresting labor. Ordinary obedience leaves far less dramatic evidence than somebody opening another man's head during a street fight. Build your picture entirely from court records, and medieval teenagers become a population of criminals. Build it entirely from apprenticeship contracts, and they become impossibly obedient workers. Neither survives much scrutiny. Real young people moved between those worlds. Imagine an apprentice spending the morning learning his craft. For hours he listens, copies, carries, cleans, and practices. He is student, worker, and dependent all at once. Later he meets several other young men. They joke around, wander, argue, perhaps drink. An insult lands badly. Suddenly the person appearing in the legal record looks nothing like the careful worker from earlier that day. Both belong to the same boy. Medieval students fit the pattern just as well. Oxford's violent cases stand out because bloodshed creates records. University life also demanded lectures, study, disputations, religious obligations, and long periods of intellectual discipline. A student could take his education seriously and still make an astonishingly stupid decision after leaving the classroom. Modern audiences should have little trouble imagining the combination. The larger difference sits in the surrounding structure. Medieval youth did not pass through a single standardized phase called adolescence, where adult responsibilities stayed outside until one legal age unlocked everything at once. Status could be layered. You might count as mature for one purpose and dependent for another, capable of earning while lacking household authority, free to travel while still supervised, economically valuable and legally constrained, physically dangerous and socially subordinate. Different institutions tried to manage those mixed statuses in different ways. Households relied on discipline. Guild structures shaped training. Universities created statutes and corporate courts. Town governments worried about public order. Families arranged placements and guarded reputations. Communities watched and judged. Authority overlapped from several directions. Sometimes it worked. Young people finished service, learned trades, built reputations, married, inherited property, entered guilds, and eventually established households of their own. Youth was expected to lead towards something. Sometimes everything fell apart. Masters could mistreat apprentices. Apprentices could abandon masters. Students turned tavern quarrels into bloodshed. Servants left households. Families fought over choices. Employers complained. Young people pushed against rules precisely because those rules controlled areas where their independence was still incomplete. Medieval society built structures around young people rather than simply tossing children into adult life and hoping they survived. Training, supervision, discipline, and reputation mattered enough for adults to create institutions around them. The rules themselves therefore become evidence. Communities would have had little reason to chase runaway apprentices, adjudicate broken service agreements, or punish disorderly students if those problems never occurred. University discipline exists because students sometimes required disciplining. Transferring a young servant into another household's authority reflects an assumption that somebody remained responsible for supervising that person. Restrictions preserve a map of what adults worried young people might do. Every so often, another record survives showing a young person doing exactly that. So were medieval teenagers really wild? Some certainly were. Young people ran away, fought, drank, became entangled in romances, violated household rules, argued with masters, and gathered into groups whose collective judgment could somehow become worse than the judgment of every individual involved. University towns produced especially spectacular examples. Subscribe if you want more medieval history built around the parts of ordinary life people usually skip. There is always another rule somebody was breaking. That only gives us part of the picture. The word teenager encourages us to take modern adolescence and dress it in medieval clothing. Then a 14 or 15-year-old appears in the sources working a full day, living away from parents, handling money, learning a profession, serving another household, or facing legal consequences. And it becomes tempting to declare that medieval society simply treated teenagers as grown adults. The boundaries were much less tidy than that. Many young people carried responsibilities earlier than a modern American teenager would expect. Those duties could be exhausting, dangerous, and economically important. Dependence remained woven through them. Parents, masters, employers, household heads, guilds, university authorities, courts, and communities could all claim some influence over what the young person did. That combination gives medieval youth much of its unfamiliar appearance. Young people could enter adult spaces without controlling them. Leaving home might lead into another person's household. Working did not automatically make you a householder. Travel did not turn you into a completely free agent. You could suffer consequences for bad decisions, while the surrounding society continued treating you as someone requiring discipline and guidance. And they were still young. New freedom, new friends, new temptations, and just enough confidence to imagine the consequences will probably land on somebody else can produce remarkably consistent behavior across centuries. The consequences themselves could be much harsher. A disastrous night for a modern 15-year-old might end with furious parents, school discipline, or a confiscated phone. A medieval version of the same ingredients, alcohol, pride, friends, and one stupid argument, unfolded in a setting where weapons were common, policing worked differently, medical treatment was limited, and reputation could shape a person's future. The impulse is easy to recognize. The environment made the outcome more dangerous. That is one reason medieval teenagers can appear so wild in the surviving evidence. We are watching familiar youth inside a society demanding serious labor early, distributing independence unevenly, and surrounding young people with several layers of authority. Their responsibilities often looked adult. Their control remained partial. The risks were genuine. The person carrying all of it might still be 15 years old. Picture an apprentice at the end of the day. He closes the workshop after hours of real work. He learned something useful. His master trusted him with tools, materials, perhaps even customers. For most of the day, he looked almost grown. Then he hears his friends outside, and suddenly, his master has an entirely different problem.